Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Rachel, and I'm a marketing coordinator here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com or by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. In the coming days, we're looking forward to welcoming Sarah Mark in conversation with Omar El Akkad, Kane Lynch, and Hazel Neal Levant on September 8th. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Chanel Miller and T Kira Madden. Chanel Miller is a writer and artist who received her BA in literature from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Her critically acclaimed memoir, Know My Name, was a New York Times bestseller, a New York Times Book Review notable book, and the National Book Critics Circle Award winner, as well as the best book of 2019 in Time, The Washington Post, The Chicago Tribune, NPR, and People, among others. She is a 2019 Time Next 100 honoree and a 2016 Glamour Woman of the Year honoree under the pseudonym Emily Doe. In the wake of her sexual assault behind the Stanford fraternity dumpster in January 2015, little was publicly known about Emily Doe beyond the description, Brock Turner's victim. Devoid of any true humanity in her own story, Emily felt what many survivors experience: fear, shame, isolation, and self-doubt. Yet even in anonymity and before the broader eruptions of #MeToo and #TimesUp, she was quietly transcending the oppressive forces of the criminal justice system and making her voice heard. Last year, Emily Doe emerged under her real name, Chanel Miller, to share the full story of her trauma and recovery in her breathtaking memoir, Know My Name. Chanel is joined in conversation by T Kira Madden, an APIA writer, photographer, amateur magician, and author of Long Live the Tribe of Fatherless Girls. She is the founding editor-in-chief of No Tokens and facilitates writing workshops for homeless and formerly incarcerated individuals. She has received fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, Hedgebrook, Tin House, Disquiet, Summer Literary Seminars, and Yaddo, where she was selected for the 2017 Linda Collins Endowed Residency Award. She lives in New York City and teaches at Sarah Lawrence College. This evening's event will also include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. And if someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please consider upvoting that particular question. And most importantly, please consider supporting Chanel Miller, T Kira Madden, and Powell's by purchasing a copy of their books. A link to buy Know My Name will be shared in the chat a few times this evening. And without any further ado, please welcome Chanel and T Kira.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
Hi, T Kira.
Hi. I'm so happy to be here, and I know. Well, I asked you to please open this with reading from your gorgeous book, so I'm going to give you some time to do that now before we kick off the conversation.
Okay, let's do it. This is my new paperback. Woo! I'm going to be reading from the afterword about what the last year has been like. And actually, tomorrow, September 4th, is the 1-year anniversary of my revealing my identity and my editor's birthday, coincidentally. So tomorrow there will be cake. All right, I will begin. No. Let's begin. In the victim realm, we speak of anonymity like a golden shield. To have maintained it for 4 years was a miracle. But while we discussed the protection it afforded, no one discussed the cost. Never to speak aloud who you are, what you're thinking, what's important to you. I was lonely. I longed to know what it was like, not to have to spend all my energy concealing the most heated parts of me. I was coming back. I kept coming back to a line from one of Lao Tzu's poems. He who stands on tiptoe doesn't stand firm. I could not spend my life tiptoeing. I skip ahead a little. I just want to protect you, my mom said. But that was the answer moms are supposed to give. I knew her real answer was buried one level beneath. I just had to wait a little longer. One day, the blessing finally came. She said, if you want to break yourself, to be bigger, to help other women, do that. Pain always gives you more power to go forward. Happiness and comfort don't. It all depends on who you want to be. And then after I had decided to use my name, I had to start figuring out how I was going to appear on camera and vocalize. everything without crying in each interview. So this is about preparation for coming forward. Deciding to use my name meant I'd have to learn to speak my story aloud. But as the requests for interviews began pouring in, I grew angry. My panic attacks returned, old unwanted feelings. I could feel myself losing my footing, slipping out of reality. I did not understand the difference between an interview and an interrogation. In court, the intention was to mock, disorient, diminish. It was never to listen. My lawyer introduced me to Laura and Hillary, two women who work in trauma-informed communications, who offered to help me prepare. They set up a digital camera, a light, a chair. I wore a starched shirt I'd bought, looked like a pilgrim at a job fair. At one point, Laura said, "What do you want them to hear from you?" I'd never been asked that before. She told me I wasn't at the mercy of the reporter's questions. I was showing up to deliver a message. This reframing changed everything. There was another question she asked that clung to me. Who are you speaking to? In 2001, a 16-year-old girl named Lindsay Armstrong was raped in Scotland. During trial, the defense attorney asked her to hold up the undies she'd been wearing at the time of the attack and to read aloud what was written on them. Little devil. The rapist was convicted, but guilty convictions don't undo damage. 3 weeks later, she killed herself. I wish I could tell her that when a question like that was posed, it was his sickness, not her weakness, that had been exposed. For so long, I worried that to be known meant to be undone. The more they see you, the more they can use against you. For years, I worried this was true. Upon finishing this book, I knew it was not. Not for me, not for Lindsay. I often question where men like the defense attorney get their confidence, while I'm the one who struggles with self-loathing, how they move unassailable through the world, while I remain hidden. I decided that for as long as they're out there, I will be out there too. I will appear on every television screen across the nation, and I will not question my being there. I will be seen, open about everything I am and ever was, because I know that from the very beginning, the defense attorney had it wrong. To be known is to be loved. My first interview would be with 60 Minutes, the episode taped in August so it could air in September. I'd never been on camera, never been on a set, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter how prestigious the platform, didn't matter if it was 12 million viewers or 2, didn't matter the heat of the honeycomb lamps or the gaze of the heavy black cameras. The night before the interview, while studying my notes, I drew a little devil on the back of my hand. In the morning, I slipped on a steamed blouse, stepped into a black SUV. I sipped my tea as they clipped a microphone to my waistband, powdered my cheeks. I stepped aside to find a sink, slowly washing the ink off my skin, thinking, thank you, as I began to feel bold and calm and clear. My purpose will always be greater than my fear. All of these cameras and correspondence were simply the vessel I needed in order to get to her. I was going to tell her, we get to wear whatever the fuck underwear we want. And then the final paragraph. Almost 5 years had passed since the assault, and I was finally going to meet the Swedes. On a warm summer evening in New York City, there's Peter, there's Carl. We embrace, sit down, order calamari. The conversation could only be described as sitting by a fire. One of them voices that he'd felt regret and guilt. For what, I say? For not coming 5 minutes sooner. I'm laughing, realizing that even the saviors felt like they could have done better. I think about all the things we wish we could change, all the if-onlys, all the different stories that could have played out. But for all the fear, the pain, all that could not be redeemed, what I'll remember for the rest of my days are the ones who never gave up on me, who led me back to my life. So thank you. Here I am in my life with T Kira. It's raining so hard. Can you hear it? Should I close my window?
We can't hear it.
Our applause for that. Thank you, Chanel. I can't actually listen to you read that without crying.
Nice.
Thank you so much for reading that. I'm so honored to be here. I met Chanel at a San Francisco reading for my book launch, and this feels so full circle and so special to be here with you. And such a reminder of what this means, like beyond what we're writing about, what this actually means to be writing in community, not only with you, Chanel, but with everybody in the chat box and the people who've shown up for me and for you. So thank you all for being here. And again, Powell's for hosting my launch and Chanel's launch.
I want to say, I did go to T Kira's, one of her readings in San Francisco when I was still anonymous. I went with my friend Kayla, and I remember like looking at you and thinking, like seeing a half Asian command a room and like projecting myself into that space. Like, can I do that? Can I occupy that role? Do I want to do that? Yes. And so it was important for me to see you there. And then this is the book I bought, and my friend and I were first in line, and you signed it. And it says, "To our unfinished stories." And so my story was definitely unfinished. I still hadn't finished the book, and I still hadn't come forward. So that's really special.
Yeah, it was a special story. I was so moved by your statement before I knew who you were, before I knew your name. And then we had this exchange at the bookstore that I didn't forget, because we talked about what it means to write our stories and what it means to write trauma and to rise above the things that have happened to us. And then if you don't know the story, it's kind of special. I was then invited later to one of Chanel's launch lunches, and I had no idea why I was invited. And then she came up to me and said, "I came to your launch when I wasn't out with my name yet, and you told me that to write this story."
For mine, yeah.
Reminder for all of us of what literary community can do, regardless of our name or who we are or what contracts we sign. That just by showing up and cheering each other on, and our stories it means everything, and it's not forgotten, and it hasn't been for me. So thank you, Chanel. Okay, move into this talk. I promised it would be fun. So for the past year, so many people have talked about one of your stories, one of your many stories, and especially this case. So I really wanted to spend tonight to really honor the work you've done as a writer and as an artist, and to not focus on that, but instead where our stories come from, where our stories are born, and how they're created and how they become a book. Because I think beyond the content of your book, what is so miraculous is the actual writing and the craft itself. So I'm going to focus on that. I quoted another part that says, this is Chanel, "I realized the assault was never all-consuming. I was full of experiences. I was emerging as a fleshed-out author, daughter, sister, artist, too many identities to be contained. I did not know the path ahead, but I was now fully aware of the person who'd be walking it. That was enough." I think a simpler way to tell this story in your book for a lesser writer might be to just say A, B, C, this is what happened, and that's the end of it. But what you've done is you've opened up this kaleidoscopic view of you, Chanel, as the person, and you as a character in this book that gets to the daughter, the sister, the partner, the artist. And you do that so masterfully, using time travel within every scene. You slip back and forth in time. You use beautiful metaphor and beautiful simile. You create rhyming action through images. We have geese flying, and then we have a goose feather that returns pages later. And we create these connections of you as a fully dynamic person. And it's so beautiful to see on the page. So I'm curious for you, what that process looked like. If the book began as a more skeletal, these are the facts of the case and the story, or if it always had these slips in time, or if that came through healing and through revision and through working with an editor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my editor, Andrea, was so incredible, taught me so much about structure and pacing, and really kept me moving. I think there were many times I would have given up telling the story because it was so miserable at times to be writing, which is also something that you don't think about when you're like aspiring to be a writer. Once you're there, you're like, damn, what am I doing? This is so hard. But yeah, I think I started started the book with the assault, but I wanted to get away from the idea of like, this is the night everything changed, and because for me, it didn't happen like that. And because my story had been told so many times in the news already, it bothered me that there were so many narratives that picked up on the skeletal facts of my story, but didn't have the emotional potency that I possessed. And the reality they were depicting did not align with the reality I was living. So I felt a duty to like stake my claim and show people what was really happening. And for me, yes, there's the night of the assault, but by Monday, I'm back at work. And I think that's what happens for a lot of survivors. You don't realize the implications until later. And that's what's a big part of the danger of these stories, is that they slip in really slowly and they erode you over time. And you start to realize you're worn out. You start to realize you're irritant, and it's not like an overnight thing. And you don't even understand what's been lost yet or how you've changed. And I think it's much more interesting the way I was getting to know my new self and adapt to my new world. In the book, it was really important to, my editor helped me realize that I needed to establish who I was before the assault so that people could track how I was changing. Because again, everyone's different. Like, it affects all of us differently. There are things like, when I moved into Lucas's apartment, sort of just showed up on his doorstep, that was a huge step for me, because one of my greatest fears as a human since childhood has been imposing on other people. Like, asking for help is huge for me. And so you have to realize that I was at a point where I was desperate enough to ask for something, which was not natural. And so I needed to take the time to show people who I was so you could track me and see who I was becoming.
I love that. That reminds me of Chanel has a new installation up at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, which is incredible. Congratulations. And it's 3 panels, and it was I was, I am, I will be, with different images for all of those 3 panels. And I thought it was really interesting hearing you talk about how you liked the idea that people could be walking in any direction, and that the timeline of those 3 panels could be fluid between past, present, and future. And that's something I think about so much in terms of a 3-act structure or the hero's journey. That's kind of hammered into us as this Western structure. You have to follow this arc and arrive someplace else. You arrive in triumph or you arrive in despair. And I think your book so resists that, and so does your art. And I was wondering how you feel about a timeline or time construct such as that.
Well, first, I think that writing is the only societally acceptable way of spending time in your past, because we're creating something as we're spending time in our past. Whereas a person who's just sitting in their past, everyone's like, what are you doing? Move on. Like, you're just dwelling on something. But if you're writing, you're like, no, like, I'm busy. I've been paid to do this. But I think it's a privilege that I had, that I got to sit down for 2.5 years and go through things that have already happened, which some might argue that's a waste of time and you're not developing, when I would argue that the more backwards I went in my life, the more farther ahead I ended up emerging. And so I realized that through writing, that I wasn't, behind all of my peers, that that was my way of developing. And so I think I encourage people to do that and say that it's not a failure or an inability to keep going. Like, you are still going. And I think we just have, especially in Western culture, a resistance to turning back around or creating long pause. Like, it's very hard to slow things down. And now the pandemic has like done it for us. And I think that's why it's also difficult, because all the momentum we have and all the momentum people are used to having abruptly stopped, and things that you may have been avoiding start like flooding in. And so, yeah, I just, as a writer, feel grateful I was able to be in the past. And I also think about like walking into the courthouse. There was this plastic entrance, the little security thing, but I called it like a portal. It was a portal into a world where I would forget about everything outside the world. I would become a diminished version of myself, you know? And I think today, if I were to walk through that same thing, that would threaten to happen, no matter how strong I am, no matter what mental faculties I have. It is scary. You can always slip back in different ways. But I think that's all right, and that's a part of it.
Thank you. I'm curious, I think if we're talking about time, I'm interested in this conversation that we had a little bit earlier about you and I have a lot of similarities. We're both biracial people writing about trauma, and we've both written and published these memoirs in our 20s. And some might call that, you know, amazing, but others might say, what do you know in your 20s? Like, why would you write about an experience so soon, and so soon after an event, even if it feels like an eternity to us between the trauma in our books and, you know, where we are when we actually sit at the desk and render that trauma. So I'm curious how you feel about maybe you see it as reductive, maybe not, and maybe what advice you'd give to others who are told, you know, you have your whole life to live before you write about that thing, wait until you have more wisdom or knowledge, versus maybe writing the thing as it happens or directly after it happens. How do you feel about time in terms of crafting?
Yeah, I think when we do that, or say you're too young to assign value, then you're also sort of reducing the significance of emotional experiences, just like minimizing emotions in general and not taking them seriously. And I think about how, you know, after the assault, I finally submitted to going to therapy. But honestly, up until then, for those first 22 years of my life, I thought, I'm self-sufficient, I can take care of myself, I'm self-aware. And it was only in therapy we began talking about other formative events in my life, other traumas. And we talked about the school shooting at my university, the multiple suicides at my high school. And those were communal traumas. So I never assigned them to me. And when I was thinking about it visually, I was like, okay, it was like I'm driving down a path and there was like a big landslide. I'm like, whoa, I got to go around this, but it's not going to touch me. And I go again and there's another landslide. And then the assault was like the roadblock where it's like, okay, well, it happened to my body. I like can't trick myself out of this one. But I think to not have acknowledged the impacts of both of those things was such a loss. And again, spoke to that pressure to keep moving and just say, you know, you're still here, we're still going, focus on the positive, instead of like taking time to take inventory of what a massive loss that was, and how it continued to shape your thinking. So yeah, I hope we can just value our experiences more early on, because they're so emotionally potent, and these are our formative years.
Yeah, and I think, you know, honoring the container of who you were, honoring the book as a container of who you were as you wrote the thing, rather than constantly revising the story you know, for 50 years and having one product, I think we can write about the same things over and over again, and that will always look different. And I think sometimes there's this misconception that you have one shot, you have one go at writing the story, and it has to be at X age, whatever that is. But really, we can keep approaching that. We can keep sharing that if we want to. We can keep it to ourselves if we want to. But we can approach it different years of our lives and see it differently. And I think that's beautiful.
Totally. And a part of it, I think, like, or parallels, I think, in our books involve things that we've learned and or ways we would have wanted to protect our younger selves, even if they're only a few years younger, and wanting to just get that down and take note of it. And I think, you know, like in our 40s, we'll look back on ourselves in our 20s, be like, oh, little babies, we would have taken care and had advice for these selves too. So, yeah.
Do you have any advice for people in the audience who might be thinking about writing trauma or writing about something really difficult? You and I have talked about, you know, how words have been used like brutal and grotesque about the things we've described in our books and the details we've described, and the differences between writing an action versus an experience tethered to a body and tethered to a self, and how that subverts a gaze. So I guess that's not much of a question, but any advice about writing trauma and what that gaze has looked like for you and how that feels maybe empowering for you or tricky for you?
Yeah, I do really enjoy the ownership of writing. I did feel like I was finally crafting my own world, and that all of the real humans and characters who previously scared me were very small, like chess pieces, and I could move them around, and I could put language to what they looked like and how they spoke and their mannerisms. And I think that agency helped with the trauma of the lived experience a lot, because they were like my puppets. And I thought a lot about how it helped with trust. Like, in order to write and be honest, you have to trust some reader out there. You have to trust the general public. And at first I really didn't, and I was too worried. And I think in court, I had grown used to having to say something 10 times or testify in multiple times in order to try and get a single point across. Whereas in writing, I was writing like that, and I just kept repeating myself. Like, I would say this, and I'd be like, but it's only because I was blah, blah, blah. Or like, I only went there because, and my editor's like, the average person, like, if you say I was assaulted, they're gonna be like, oh, that's awful. And you only have to say it once, and then you can move on. And you have to just hope that the other person has common sense and accepts what you say and follows you in the story, rather than spending the entire story trying to convince them that what you're saying is true. And so it helped me kind of come back to that state of like, just put it down and hope that they'll take it in, but you don't have to spend the rest of your life and energy like pounding it into their minds for you to be heard. And I think that's really important.
That's so true. And I think about that too, in terms of, as creative nonfiction writers, of course, we have to build scenes, we have to build dialogue. Of course, you're going off records. But in general, when we're recreating the past or history, or when we're children, we're building a world. And I think about this a lot in how people who have experienced trauma, or people like you and I who have been through the criminal justice system and trial, that like the slightest thing that feels off from memory is just another way that somebody can invalidate our stories, right? It's like this immediate trigger of, oh, if one thing is wrong, will you not believe me? Will you not believe the entire story? And I have to remind myself that no, that's just another side effect of this thing that we've experienced, right? From being in that.
Yeah, like the whole first year, I would like write a line and delete it, and I was like, I'm gonna reopen my case. Like, I'm gonna mess everything up because this timestamp was different than my testimony timestamp. It's like, it's so twisted and it's so not true to life. And it's not, nobody should be expected to live that way or that obsessively. And so I think it's sort of beautiful just accepting the fact that like, this is my story, take it or leave it. But it's not my job to like adhere to your definitions of right and wrong. And I think another part that I liked was I was really obsessed with like showing all of the things the defense attorney said. Like I just included everything. I was like, I will not let you get away with any of this. Like I'm gonna call you out, put you on blast. And then my editor, you know, she'll like call me and say like, what is your message? And like, why are you writing it and for whom? And so I think about it would be such a small thing to just annihilate this one little person. And I thought, I don't even have to talk about who he was or what he did. All I have to do is include a few sentences and really his lines spoke for themselves, right? And so it's not like I have to put him in some light to convey him as the mean character. I realize all I have to do is let him be himself on the page and let the audience come to their own conclusions. And that was sort of amazing. It's like, I don't have to be out there battling everyone. I just have to let everyone see who they were and what they said, and then my work is done. Yeah.
Someone in the chat saying how much readers do trust the written word. There is such power to that narrative voice, right? And we don't have to constantly engage with that battle. We just kind of put it out there and people can make sense of that. And I loved this thing that Laura Vandenberg said recently in a class I took that was not about memoir. It was about surreality and surrealism and fiction. But she was talking about agency in terms of not what somebody does to the world, but agency of consciousness, and how reading actually allows us that, like in moments in time where we didn't act upon the world in an active way of agency. Some might kind of box that into that experience. By writing, by the act itself, we can create agency of consciousness, an activity of consciousness, of kind of the hero's journey, if you will, of where we were going mentally when these things were happening to us, whether or not we had power or agency. And I thought that was just really beautiful in terms of creation and making art and writing in general.
I love that.
Let's talk about maybe the first stories or narratives that made you excited about story and art in the world. And as you said, the first markers of self that you may or may have not seen in the world.
Well, story-wise, I loved Remy Charlotte, who was a writer, children's book writer, illustrator. My favorite book was Arm in Arm, and it's two octopuses getting married on the cover, and it's like two octopi walk down the aisle, arm in arm and arm and arm and arm. And I was like, oh, that's so genius. Like the things you can do with words. And he had this other book called Unfortunately. And it's this kid who's just like trying to get to a birthday party. And it's like, unfortunately, his plane exploded. Fortunately, he landed in a haystack. Unfortunately, there was a pitchfork in a haystack. So it's like you're turning each page and it's just like good, bad, good, bad. But like, honestly, for everything I do, I feel like that's the pattern. That's your life. That's like any narrative is like not some happy kid story, but this like fluctuating of like, dang, it went bad, but then it was all right. And then everything went to heck. And so, I guess I really appreciated that format of storytelling. What about you?
I told Chanel earlier about the people who I didn't realize at the time, but I now think of as kind of coded lesbians or coded gay people, because I hadn't come to terms with that part of myself. So I was a big Titanic Jack Dawson fan, a big Sonora Webster of Wild Hearts Can't Be Broken in Disney. And we talked a little bit about the Wonder Years and Winnie Cooper and Kevin Arnold. I wouldn't say in terms of biracial identity or lesbian identity, that's something I even looked for as a kid. So I kind of found my people in other ways, or in other symbols, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think we actively seek it, but I think when you see it, you feel this tingle of recognition that you're like, oh, that's something. Yeah.
I'm going to open up the Q&A right now, and I see immediately a question that I was going to ask you anyways, so we'll go right there. To both of you, the biggest fear I have in writing memoir is not strangers reading it, but the people I know reading it, particularly family. How do you overcome that fear? And Chanel, you and I have talked about writing family and writing the people we love as these characters that, of course, we don't get the full scope of them as people. We get them in terms of how they further the story that we're trying to tell and what that feels like. So maybe how do you reconcile that? And also, how do we separate maybe ourselves as the writer from ourselves in the world?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in my first draft, I didn't include my family at all. Again, I hadn't built up trust yet. I was like, no one deserves to know them. Like, I'm going to protect them. Like, this isn't part of anything. And then I realized, I got to get back to me. And, one case my editor made was that it's not just who they are as people, but the roles they played in the ongoing experience that you're living, right? And so, especially as a survivor, I think so much of how you heal after an assault is informed by the response you have from the people around you. May it be your partner or your parents or your siblings. And so it was really important to have those characters and show what responses were really nourishing and what I needed at that time, what responses set me off or what I rejected. But I think just showing in how people survive, there was dynamics and of me wanting to protect them. And I also think it was really important to show that they were all impacted, because I think in these stories, we focus on the victim, like it's her atrocity, but it hurts for everyone who loves the victim. And I don't think we think about that. Like, when an assault happens to one person, it hurts the whole community. And she belongs to that community and cannot be separated from it. And so it's important to acknowledge that impact and sort of the ripple effects of that suffering, because it's something that we overlook as we treat her as the isolated person.
Beautifully said. Chanel, I love your art, especially your recent mural with the Asian Art Museum. Is there a way to support your art, such as buying prints?
I'll have exciting announcements soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I was wondering if you...
Don't worry. Coming. T Kira, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I want to ask how you took care of yourself while you were writing, because I think it's a really unique job that requires processing and breaks. And I wonder what that looked like for you. Or just cried a lot, like I did.
Well, the movie Moana came out in the final draft, so I was going to the theaters to see that movie after every draft.
That's right.
Plug into whatever movie it was. But I think very sincerely, the dialogues I'd most feared having to write a book like this with my family, with my friends. I see both my moms in the audience, and my mom specifically, like these things that we're so afraid to confront, to write something like this can actually be really beautiful and really healing, and to confront these memories and to kind of build and render on the page not only what happened, but as Amy Hempel would say, the what of it, like what to make of that thing, which sometimes comes through the conversation and through that dialogue, really kind of grounded me back in the earth in a way that was really nice, and it's kind of a reintroduction for both myself and for the people in my book that got to tell me their side of the story. I think that was really nice. And it's what I feared the most, but in fact, it was maybe the most memorable part of that, is those long conversations that were sometimes difficult, but sometimes just really nice.
Yeah, that you wouldn't have had otherwise, or it's much harder to create an entry point if it's not for, like, toward a purpose. So I agree.
Would you have, let's talk about this.
I know, let's just dig up old stuff. Yeah.
Let's see. Your books have such powerful titles. What was the titling process like for both of you? I know it can be a journey to settle on the perfect one. And perhaps, Chanel, we could open that up to covers as well.
Yeah. It's so funny. I have my notebook upstairs that was literally all titles. Like, Lucas and I would go on walks and just like spit titles. I had like over 100. I was really set on tadpole, because tadpole was one of the metaphors in the book, and it was like kind of obscure and like indie. But then they're like, oh, maybe, I don't know, maybe something a little more speaking. Tiffany said absolutely not. And then, okay, fine, I won't even say the other ones, but a lot of them ended up sounding like band names, or they sounded like too triumphant. And I kind of wanted the reader to have that, like, you know, the aha moment when you get to the title in the book and you're like, that's where it came from. But I really liked Know My Name. It has a nice na-na-na, and obviously it speaks for itself. And then the title, the designer came up with the kintsugi, and it's so, the golden cracks. I want to show you something. Wait. My best friend, Mel, actually made me a bowl.
Wow.
Like, made it, cracked it, repaired it with gold, and painted it blue. So that's a really nice shout out. But yeah, we started off with different metaphors in the book. There was one that was like, there's a little dust metaphor in there. So there was like sparkly gold, but then it looked like sand. There was a jar, because that's in the book. Like, we were trying to think of concrete images, but then it was like no single concrete image summed up the book. And then I remember I was in the Penguin offices and we were deciding between like a cream cover, a more green cover, and I texted Tiffany, I was like, what color should it be? And she recommended this one, so we went with this one. And then the dedication, this little drawing, I had asked my editor when I was at Penguin, I was like, can I add a drawing for the dedication? She's like, sure, if it's like done by the end of lunch. So I was like, okay. And I just went into the room and was like making all these doodles, and then finally landed on this one, and I cut it out of my notebook and they scanned it in and it went into the book. So it was kind of a hectic, I mean, we were talking about like writing down to the final deadline, but like the jacket was like all final decisions in one day, boom. It was nuts. What about you? This is T Kira's cover, which is like gorgeous. Look at can you see the glittery? And I love how they left this like clump of glitter, like so organic.
On my desk, I have my book designer, Tree Abraham, who's amazing. For my book launch last year, she gave me this packet, and it's OG original glitter. And
Cute.
So it's actual glitter from the cover that they use to scan.
That's so special.
Yeah.
A lot.
title I wanted for my book was The Rat's Mouth.
Yeah, I remember that. This is why they don't let us make these decisions, because we have no idea what we're talking about. Like tadpole in the rat's mouth. Imagine if we had a reading together. What does that even mean?
The grunge band versions of
so funny.
is the translation of Boca Raton, where I grew up. So I thought that was really, really smart.
Code word.
My editor had a great point that she said, do you want your book, the title, to be something that shuts down or that opens into something more? And The Rat's Mouth is kind of a punchline. Once you figure it out, that's the end of it, versus something that, long live the tribe of fatherless girls. I obviously had a father who was in and out of my life until he passed away. So it's more of this question of what is fatherlessness, or what is anythinglessness. And the glitter, it took a long time to get there, and I was resistant at first, because I think 27-year-old me wasn't the person who would choose glitter for a book title. But then I remembered that the book was really about more 13-year-old me, and she was the glitter. She's the person who poured glitter on everything. And so I tried to honoring the container of the person, that would be the dream cover of the actual character that I was writing into. So
I like that a lot. It's for her.
Yeah, it's for her. Let's see. I saw something about, so many questions, sorry. There was something about writing, and if, Chanel, would you ever write fiction? Has any fiction you've read recently knocked your socks off?
Oh, we prepared for this question, but oh yeah. I already posted on Instagram about it, but the Nickel Boys was like so well crafted in terms of story. Oh my goodness. And then nonfiction, Minor Feelings, which I'll recommend for the rest of my life. In the Dream House was incredible. Weather was very good. That's fiction. Yes. What about you?
I do write fiction. For the first part of the question, I'm working on a novel now. I've written way more fiction than nonfiction, actually. Let's see, K. Ming Chang's Bestiary is coming out at the end of this month. It's amazing. And Milk, Blood, Heat by Dantil Monez is coming out in the spring. That was really good. And a memoir I just finished, it's called Negative Space by Lily Danziger. Is just one of the best things I've read in so long. It's amazing. I want to give that a shout out too. That comes out in the spring as well.
You know, the books I've seen you post about too that I've loved to death are We the Animals, which is like pivotal. My professor, Ellen O'Connell, made us read it. It was life-changing. And then anything of Linda Berry's, like anything Linda Berry has created. Yeah.
Linda Berry is my favorite writer of all time. Yeah. Filipino writer, and also does comics and graphic novels for any of you who haven't checked out her work yet. Freddie's my favorite book in the whole world ever written, but everything she writes is amazing. And definitely check out Syllabus if you're looking for just writing prompts. So good. Okay. Janelle, do you want to speak to, I mean, I think the afterword definitely gets to this, but overcoming the fears of revealing your actual name and identity, maybe thoughts that went into that.
Oh, it took so long. Like I had so many, I was going to use my Chinese last name. I was going to use my middle name. Like I was all over the place. It was really difficult. I don't think, again, in the afterward I say, I don't think there's ever a day where I firmly decided. It was sort of like I acknowledge that I'm on this moving train and I'm not willing to like get off and scuttle back to my cave. Like I just have to stay here and accept that so much is out of my control and protect myself the best way that I can. I will say that leading up to my name reveal, it was a little bit somber. Like I feel like my family and our close friends were preparing for battle and really like having our guard up and preparing for the worst. And then in this last year, it's been really nice, again, going back to trust, but like going to these spaces and just feeling how warm they are and like how ready everyone was to like receive me, or how it's not like I'm stepping out totally exposed. Like I genuinely feel there are people out there protecting me, you know, like, and that's been really unbelievable. So I feel very lucky I've been able to feel that in person. I feel glad that I didn't deny myself that connection, simply due to fear. But I think, again, it's also a choice you have to make on your own. Like I received immense pressure from media outlets to come out as soon as the statement was released. And I said, absolutely not. And it really doesn't matter when your story's hot. It doesn't matter when you're trending. All that matters is what feels right in your own life. May it be now or 10 years from now. The most important part is that you're doing it on your own terms and in your own way. And I think when you can do it in a way that you're deciding, it's much easier to get behind and to step into, rather than if someone exposes you. That's incredibly traumatizing, and why we must always protect anonymity until the survivor feels that they're ready.
Beautiful, thank you. Let's end with, I like this. What have you both been finding joy in doing recently, and where have you been finding fun?
Fun.
We talk about joy, and I'm personally so inspired, Chanel, by looking at your Instagram and seeing your comics, and this idea of finding one good thing, your walks to find one good thing. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that too.
Yeah, I would do that a lot on really difficult days where I like really couldn't see past my immediate surroundings. Like I'd see a kid reading on a bench and I was like, okay, project yourself into that kid's reality. Like that's a pretty sweet life. And there's these like sweet lives unfolding around you, even if yours is not so sweet right now. One thing I love in New York is there's so many of the parks have little structures like metal flower stems that spurt water. I guess because, I don't know, in California you have an abundance of swimming pools, so all the parks aren't like exploding with sprinklers and water. So it's really fun seeing all the kids like delighting in these like cement creeks where there's like pigeons walking, and just, you know, the joy of them playing, and all the adults sort of like sit on the side and like, where's our like adult water park? Like we need relief too. So at least I get to see the kids like indulging in that. What about you? Where's your joy, your source of joy right now?
Little things too, just these kids on my block, they've been choreographing dances with no music, and they're across the street social distancing. So they just stare at each other from across the street and do these dances with no music, and it's like an amazing indie film or something just to watch it and just watch these kids develop this deep, beautiful friendship in a time such as now. Which
Yeah,
also,
I want to do long distance silence dancing. I'll do it with you.
There's another amazing Linda Berry book called The Good Times Are Killing Me, about a friendship at that age, and kind of like walking backwards down the street waving until you kind of lose each other, and that obsessive friendship love at that time in your life. And so it's been really moving to watch that. Yeah. And also to be kind of a nerd and talk about writing. I think being quarantined for this long has made me have a lot more fun in writing nonfiction and experimenting with time travel and like these tools of surrealism in nonfiction, and to think about speculative nonfiction of how, instead of, again, the XYZ of what happened, how can we play with alternate stories and alternate realities of what could have been, or alternate characters, and just time travel and space travel in general in writing has been kind of freeing, because when you're stuck here, like you have to time travel and to move around in space mentally more than I think I would if I were actually doing that every day.
I love that. I think the structure of life has dissolved, and so your mind is sort of free to roam, and also no boundaries, no deadlines, nothing is set. And for writing, I think that can be good.
Okay, Chanel, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi. I mean, you two could just like keep going forever. The chat is clearly just like so enamored with you two. My mom just texted me saying, they're so amazing.
Aww.
So shout out to my mom.
Mom, you have a beautiful Hapa daughter.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us for tonight's event, wherever you are in the world. It was a pleasure to host Chanel Miller, T Kira Madden, and welcome all of you. Please consider purchasing a copy of Know My Name by visiting us at powells.com. And we look forward to seeing you at another one of our events again soon. Take care until then.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye, Tiff. Call me.